Vampires, vampires, vampires. They're everywhere. From their humble origins in folklore, to the classic novel Dracula, to the charming Bela Lugosi, to an 80s gang, to Nick Cage thinking he became one, to a series of books and movies that pitted women against themselves over a werewolf and a vampire. There are many, many more vampire tales, but one of the more notable ones is a silent film from 1922, Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. This film is extremely iconic, despite being a very bad attempt to avoid copyright law, as they couldn't get the rights to Dracula, and tried to circumvent it, kinda like those knockoff Pixar movies. But it failed, and the company got sued and went bankrupt, with the judge ordering that every copy be destroyed. But thankfully it survived and is a horror classic. This knockoff Dracula has inspired many films, notably the Werner Herzog remake in the 70s, and the Willem Dafoe one in the 2000s, where he's a vampire playing an actor playing the Count Orlok in the fictional making of the 20s classic. Nosferatu has even made cameos in such shows as SpongeBob and American Dad.
The boy seeks to outlive you.
Is this true, Steve?
What makes a 20s film so iconic? Nosferatu himself. Count Orlok's look is haunting. This hairless, monstrous figure with long fingers and arched back with a terrifying gaze that steals your attention. Max Schreck really nailed the performance, and no one else has been able to quite capture it like he did. And a lot of talent has tried, like Willem Dafoe and Klaus Kinski. But of course, the expressionistic style also helped, like with the use of shadows, and is a classic of German expressionist cinema. It really is something great to watch on Halloween, and it's public domain, so you can watch it anywhere. But with this recent Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers, I've been disappointed. I've been a big fan of Eggers since his beginning with films like The Witch in 2015, a fascinating tale about a Puritan family who's been shunned by their community and must live in the woods alone while being threatened by supernatural forces. My favorite film of his was of course The Lighthouse in 2019 with its gorgeous black and white cinematography and story of two lighthouse men going mad. It's a great blend of humor and horror. The Northman I enjoyed, but not as much. It was good, but it didn't have that captivating quality his previous films did. But that could also just be because I found the eras of colonial 17th century New England and 19th century maritime New England more interesting, as I'm from New England. But I still enjoyed the film. Eggers' films have always had a trademark of quality, as he's very meticulous about set design, language, historical authenticity, and really all aspects of his craft. This Nosferatu movie I was very excited to see. It was something Eggers tried to do for a while, ever since The Witch, and he started thinking about doing it when he was 9. He was very fond of the 20s classic, but he always struggled to get it made. Luckily, he did. But after watching it, I kinda realized why he had a hard time getting the green light. It adds nothing really interesting to the tale, when you need to do that in order to make it stand out from the billion other vampire movies. Dracula and Nosferatu are essentially the same story, but they do have distinct moods that separate them. Dracula is more charming and human-looking, while Orlok is not, and Nosferatu is more expressionistic. And that is really what makes the movie special. So one would think Eggers would embrace the expressionistic style of Nosferatu, as that's what makes it stand out. The shadows, the faces, the expressions. But does Eggers do that with this version? Largely, no. There's a shadow of Orlok's hand, but other than that, there's not much. And while I do think the shot of the hand over the city is interesting, I don't think it beats the simple use of shadows in the original. Ultimately, it seemed more like instead of trying to make a Nosferatu adaptation that differentiates itself from the Dracula tale, and instead attempts to be even more like Dracula. The main character Thomas is just Jonathan Harker, Ellen is Lucy, and Mina combined. Professor Alban Eberhard von is Van Helsing, and Ernok is Renfield. It takes place in Germany, like Nosferatu, but all the actors have English accents. In watching it, I had to remind myself that it's taking place in Germany and not England. Why not just have them do a German accent? Eggers did that with the Northmen, having non-Icelandic actors speak with an Icelandic accent. Or why not just have it set in London? Dracula is. Count Orlok in this film looks like a buff zombie Vlad the Impaler, which is something similar to the description of Dracula in the book, but it's not Nosferatu. It's a buff zombie with a mustache who sleeps in his coffin with no clothes for some reason. The change in appearance of Orlok is one of the few things Eggers adds, and I don't really think it works. Even if it's what vampires looked like in the folklore. It's not what the original Count Orlok, Nosferatu, looked like. Nosferatu's look is iconic, but this isn't iconic. We don't really see too much of him. Maybe that was a creative choice to make him more scary, but I don't think it really works. He looks really more like a zombie than a vampire. The characters are otherwise rather repetitive and bland. I really can't think of any twists on the characters that are really that interesting. It's just that Ellen's staying with a character who's reminiscent of Lucy as well, but instead of being single, she's married with children. That's about it. Willem Dafoe gives a good performance, but the character feels in vein of his Lighthouse character, and is nothing new either, especially considering Anthony Hopkins already played Van Helsing quite well in the Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, and not to mention all the other Van Helsings throughout the years. The other performances are fine, but they don't really stand out, and aren't really notably different from their predecessors. The look of the film is fine, but a lot of it doesn't really grab your attention the same way Eggers' previous work did. It's professional, but it doesn't really wow you. It's just fine, not great. The film is influenced by the book, the 20s version, the Herzog version, and the 90s Dracula, and many more movies. The film takes from all of these, but does not add or build anything from it. The more prominent sensuality of the film was portrayed in 90s Dracula and 70s Nosferatu. The embrace of irrationality in times of science was also addressed in those movies in similar ways. And the other two films actually have an interesting take on the vampire tale. The 70s Nosferatu does seem to look like a TV movie at times, but Kinski's more muted portrayal of Orlok is interesting. The folky music is a little bizarre, but is interesting. The ending is also interesting, and it builds upon the silent version. It also has its own style and distinctive feel. The 90s Dracula also builds itself with a lot of influences, and is quite expressionistic with its style. It takes a lot of chances, and while I don't think it always pays off, it's interesting. And despite not being a Nosferatu adaptation, it's more in vein of that than Eggers is. Really, I think the problem with this film is the fact that it's in the middle. It doesn't really take an interesting approach that separates itself from the others. It just takes bits and pieces from other films and makes something middle ground. And to use the famous allegory of John Ford talking to a young Spielberg,
when the horizon's at the bottom, it's interesting. When the horizon's at the top, it's interesting. When the horizon's in the middle, it's boring as shit.
But despite all my criticisms, it's not a bad film. It's just mediocre, and I think Eggers could have done better. He's a filmmaker with a distinct style and feel that is a breath of fresh air in today's film scene. The style feels distinct. I think that's primarily because of his love of history. He does his research, reading old texts, specifically old Puritan texts for the Witch, Lighthouse Logs for the Lighthouse, and Norse epics for the Northmen. The sets for those films he built according to historical accuracy and was very meticulous with all aspects of the film to capture a historically accurate portrait, while also trying to capture the rich magic of the folklore. This film doesn't feel the same way. Even though he was meticulous, I think he was too influenced by other films, and I don't think he explored the old vampire folklore enough, which is his niche. I think that maybe he should have just tried making a vampire movie solely based on the vampire folklore, and forget about Dracula and Nosferatu. Then I think the Vlad the Impaler character could have been more interesting. The world has enough cinephile filmmakers, people who make movies and are only inspired by films, and essentially make films to talk about the movies that inspired them. They want to go into the Criterion Closet to showcase their love of lesser-known films, to show off their sophisticated taste, and talk about how their picks inspired them. Influence from other films is important, but what makes Eggers so unique is his other influences, and I hope for his next film he will embrace them. Which I think he will. I think this is just a mild bump in the road. That really isn't a bump, because a lot of people love this film, and it did well at the box office. I'm excited to see what he does next.